I'm Washington correspondent Maddie Beertemple. On this week's Capitol Conversations, we sat down with Oregon Democratic Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. She weighs in on the war in Iran.
It's costing lives, it's costing money, and rising prices.
Her concerns with the upcoming wildfire season in Oregon.
If they're making cuts to the science, the satellite data that we get and all the information that we get that helps pinpoint where the fires are.
Plus her efforts to overturn a new Education Department rule capping certain federal student loans.
I call it a dream killer. If somebody really wants to be a nurse or an educator or a physical therapist, for example, they're going to be very limited in what they can borrow.
This Capitol Conversation starts with the war in Iran's impact on gas prices, which Thursday hit $5.35 a gallon in Oregon. How has that affected your district, and what have you heard from constituents about that?
It's affected my district a lot, and I've heard from many constituents about their concerns about, well, affordability in general. Costs are just too high on so many things, on housing, on healthcare, on groceries, on childcare. But now with the gas prices going up, it's just adding to the anxiety of people in the district. And I have a constituent from up in Columbia County who sent me a picture of the price on the gas pump. It cost $118 to fill up his car. I just talked to somebody recently, just this morning, who said it cost almost $100 to fill up their cars. That's unacceptable. People cannot afford that right now when people are really struggling.
And the president has proposed pausing the federal gas tax, which is about 18 cents a gallon for a gallon of gas. I think it's 24 cents for diesel. And I know there are some bills in Congress proposed by both Republicans and Democrats to try to do that. Is that something you support? Do you see that as a possible solution to this?
What I see as a solution to this is to end the war. The war is costing somewhere between $1 and $2 billion a day. It is not a war that Congress voted for or was even given the opportunity. We are going to try to pass another war powers resolution to say to this president, you cannot start a war without congressional approval. We need to stop the war. It's costing lives, it's costing money, and rising prices. So that's my proposal. Instead of stopping the gas tax, which funds our road infrastructure and our transportation infrastructure, stop the war and use that $1 to $2 billion a day for things that actually help people here in the United States.
And you mentioned that war powers resolution. We've seen the administration kind of argue that the clock stopped once a ceasefire was in place in terms of that 60-day need to get reauthorization from Congress or authorization.
No, I don't agree with that.
And why not? Do you think it at all pauses during some kind of ceasefire?
I don't think so. I don't know about technically, but what I hear from my constituents is that they don't like the war, they don't like the rise in costs, and they particularly don't like that Congress has had no say in this. So I hope we can pass we have another vote soon, and that we can pass a war powers resolution to say, stop, let's figure this out. Of course, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but we had an agreement and it was working, and this president got us out of it. So let's go back to how we can do this in a diplomatic way that is not costing Americans so many lives and so much money.
We saw Secretary Hegseth has been on the Hill defending the Pentagon's budget. We know the Pentagon also seeking $200 billion in a supplemental from Congress. Also concerns about impact to weapon stockpiles. You know, what are kind of your biggest concerns from this conflict? And based on what you've heard in briefings, you know, are you concerned about weapon stockpiles?
Well, what I'm concerned about is the U.S. getting into an expensive, deadly war, especially without congressional approval. My position is based on the values I grew up with. My mother was a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and I had a poster on my wall that said, war is not healthy for children and other living things. And so I always look to, is this a problem we can resolve through democracy, diplomacy, development? And those are tools that this administration seems to ignore. That, to me, the Pentagon budget has always been bloated. In fact, one of my first hearings as a member of Congress back in 2012 when I was on the budget committee was with the Defense Department, and then Defense Secretary Panetta was saying that what we really need is investments in cybersecurity and intelligence. I question and have always questioned this Pentagon's massive budget. We need to really talk about how we can solve these problems without getting into another war.
Do you think there's any, validity to the president saying we need to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and they presented, an imminent threat had the U.S. not taken action? Do you think there's some element of this that the U.S. should be pursuing at all?
I agree that the U.S. that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. I agree with that. And there was an effort, and it was working, and it was a very highly negotiated by experts agreement during the Obama administration. It was called the JCPOA, Joint Council Plan of Action, I believe it was called, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. And it was working. I got briefings on it after it went into effect. We had eyes and ears on the ground. We got regular reports, and it was working. But then at the beginning of the first Trump administration, President Trump took us out of that agreement. It was working. That's the kind of thing we should do. Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. But the way that this war started, I did not see an imminent threat. I have not seen proof of an imminent threat. And this should not be happening. Again, there are other ways to address this through negotiation. At the time, the Energy Secretary was Dr. Ernie Moniz, who was a nuclear physicist. He was very involved. You have to have people who really know what they're doing. And they did it. They got an agreement that was preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but President Trump took us out of that agreement.
And I want to turn to trade. We know President Trump is in China visiting with President Xi there. And he's pulled back on some of the highest tariffs on China. But just overall, we know tariffs were a big issue before the Supreme Court
definitely
overturned that. But how has Oregon in your district been impacted by some of these tariffs?
Very much so. Oregon's a very trade-dependent district. We both import and export. We have a lot of great things that we make and grow that we export, and then we have a lot of industries that rely on components or pieces from other countries, so we both import and export. Tariffs are taxes, and targeted tariffs used to incentivize U.S. manufacturing. That makes sense if targeted and done for a limited period of time to, again, incentivize U.S. manufacturing. That's what we want. We want good jobs in the United States. That's not what this administration has done. Their tariff policy has been incredibly chaotic, and it has caused a lot of prices to go up, but also just chaos among the industries. Look at our wine industry, for example. Picking a fight with Canada, look at all of the components that we need for manufacturing. We have businesses in Oregon. We're really proud of our footwear industry and our outdoor recreation industry. They get a lot of pieces and components from other countries. I just had a conversation over on the coast in a small town that was trying to finish an infrastructure project, but their pieces were stuck on the Strait of Hormuz. That's an issue related to the war, but it's also that things are really expensive and we do import. So small businesses have been hit, especially coffee, tea. We don't grow enough coffee in the United States of America. We only grow coffee in Hawaii. That's definitely not enough to serve the coffee needs of even Oregon, much less the country. But there were tariffs on coffee. So that this administration has created a lot of chaos that has made costs go up. Since the Supreme Court decision, and I just want to congratulate our state Attorney General, Dan Rayfield, who led the effort on behalf of the states to overturn those tariffs. Now the companies are trying to get that money back, the importers, and there's a process for that, but it's got mixed reviews about whether that's working.
Are these companies getting refunds, or do you think Congress needs to be involved to try to facilitate
I
more
know
of that?
they have been applying for the importers have been applying for the refunds. I don't know if they've come through yet, but tariffs have been they are a part of the cost of goods, and so it's consumers who have really been hit. It was just Small Business Week, and I was talking with some of the small businesses that got hit with tariffs, and they can't. Small businesses typically have a very small margin, and when their prices go up. We worked with Smith Tea, for example, a great tea company based in Portland, in the district I'm honored to represent. They import different products and different components to make the tea from many different countries. They were really struggling. Fortunately, the administration heard our call to stop putting tariffs on things that we don't grow in this country, and that was addressed early on. But small businesses have been hurt by tariffs, as well as the large businesses. But they get passed on to consumers, and that's who's really feeling it.
And I want to turn to an education issue, something you're working on right now to reverse a change that the Education Department has made, dealing with limiting the definition of a professional degree for the purposes of federal loan caps. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit about what that rule is and how it impacts people, who's impacted, kind of how you're working to change that?
Yes, thank you. I'll tell you, people are really fired up about this because the Department of Education, or what's left of the Department of Education, has decided that they're going to limit student loans to people in certain professions. And they got to decide what was professional and what wasn't. And the careers that they are saying are not professional are things like nurses, teachers, physical therapists, a whole list of healthcare professions particularly are swept up into this. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Bipartisan Nursing Caucus, and we sent out a bipartisan letter with more than 150 signatures on it. Do not limit the ability of people to learn how to be a nurse, to go into a nursing program. And what's going to happen, and they put this rule into effect, and we're going to try to stop it, hopefully with bipartisan support. What is going to happen is I call it a dream killer. If somebody really wants to be a nurse or an educator or a physical therapist, for example, they're going to be very limited in what they can borrow. So if you're from a wealthy family, or if you take the risk of going to the private loan market, and some of those are predatory loans, well, then you can join the program and complete it. But otherwise, people will have their dreams killed. And so this is the wrong direction for our country, particularly with these healthcare professions that are so important. And frankly, it's just wrong for the Department of Education to say, we're going to decide where we're going to give loans that will allow people to finish a program. They should be opening the doors of opportunity for higher education, not closing them.
And you're trying to use a CRA to do that.
Right, Congressional Review Act.
How does that work?
If there's an agency rule, what a Congressional Review Act does is said we're going to stop this rule. So we're going to try that to see if we can stop this rule from going into effect. I just today spoke with somebody from the Association of Physical Therapists. Yesterday I spoke with a group here with nursing. They're very concerned. We need people in healthcare careers. And it's not just healthcare, but I'm using them as an example because people are extremely concerned about the healthcare industry and the cost of healthcare to begin with. But if we don't have enough people who are nurses or physical therapists or others, it's really going to make things more challenging for people who are seeking healthcare, but also close the door of opportunity for people who want to join, for example, the noble profession of nursing.
You're the ranking member on the Early Childhood,
yes,
Elementary and Secondary Education Committee. But I wanted to ask about a program under the so-called Big Beautiful Bill that passed last year.
I call it Big Ugly Bill because I haven't seen anything beautiful in it.
But one of those programs is a federal education freedom tax credit, is what it's being referred to as, where people can get a tax credit for donations they make to groups that then distribute that money to families for private school tuition, different educational programs. And we've seen so far 30 states adopt this. The latest New York Governor Kathy Hochul said that was something that New York was looking to opt into. So there has been some blue state support, but was just wondering, overall your thoughts on that kind of, program, deemed as school choice. Do you think that's an effective thing, and should Oregon participate?
Well, a couple things. Number one is I do not support the use of public dollars for private schools. And that's been a long time position that I have held. And for many, many years, we have not had it's a voucher, basically. It's structurally a little different, but it's essentially a voucher to use public money for private schools. We have typically been able to block voucher bills in Congress because it really is disproportionately harmful to rural communities. For example, there are places in the district I represent, the only school in the area is their public school. They like their public school. And if you say to someone, look, we're going to give you less money for your public school, but here's a voucher your student can use to go to another school, There is no other school. I'm especially concerned about the use of public dollars for private religious schools, which is my understanding allowed under this program that passed in the big ugly bill. I don't support that either. I believe in the separation of religion and government. But where I do believe in school choice is that I'm a strong supporter of the magnet school programs. And we have worked on, over the years, getting more funding through the Department of Education for starting magnet schools. Magnet schools are within the public school system, and they play by the same set of rules. For example, some of these private schools, they don't have to take students with disabilities. They can discriminate and oftentimes get away with it, and do. And I just had somebody ask me about that last weekend. Why can't we make the private schools take everybody? Because they don't play by the same set of rules. But with magnet schools, for example, in Beaverton, I just met with students from the international school. There's an arts magnet school. There's a science magnet school. There's a health careers program. Give people choice within the public school system. And another place where I absolutely am supportive is getting more hands-on project-based learning into schools so students are more engaged and stay in our wonderful public schools. Do we have work to do? Absolutely, no doubt, but opening up, using public taxpayer dollars for private schools is not the answer.
I also want to turn to wildfires. We've seen some major changes at the U.S. Forest Service, moving its headquarters, closing some regional offices. The administration saying that this will streamline operations to, be more efficient. I know you've expressed concerns about wildfire season because of some of these changes. Do you think Oregon is prepared, for wildfires?
Well, we just had a briefing on this in Oregon with the senators, and I was with Representative Salinas as well. I'm extremely concerned about the upcoming season, and yes, the so-called consolidation or streamlining of the Forest Service doesn't help. I haven't seen much streamlining in this administration that has actually helped. I'm convinced that remember DOGE, government efficiency was very inefficient. And we have seen with a lot of agencies, they let people go and then they need to call them back. And it's very chaotic and not efficient. So I don't support breaking up the Forest Service or consolidating them, especially at a time now where we are risking severe wildfire season. There's a new term that they're using called snow drought. Our snowpack is low as it has been since they started recording, I think like in the early 1980s. So there's a lot of concern about that. Our state and federal officials in Oregon have assured us that they have the personnel they need, although sometimes we bring them in from other areas. But what I'm concerned about is if they're making cuts to the science, to NOAA, which includes the National Weather Service, if they're making cuts to, for example, the satellite data that we get and all the information that we get that helps pinpoint where the fires are and target them. So and with increasing temperatures, because this administration seems to deny that there is climate change happening, which is against everything that the science is showing us, that we are having more extreme weather events, more severe weather events. We had the heat dome in Oregon a couple summers ago and people died. So we need to be doing everything we can to not only prepare for wildfires, but also wake up to the reality that we have to turn things around in terms of addressing the climate crisis.
Talking a little bit about science, I know you're also on the Committee on Science,
Yes.
Space, and Technology.
Right.
A little bit of a more fun topic this week. We saw the astronauts from Artemis 2.
Yes, I got to meet them yesterday.
Yeah, what was that like?
Pretty phenomenal. I was so excited to meet them because I watched not only the launch, but also their return with, anticipate with pride, a little anxiety, but and really, really joyful to see these 4 astronauts, all of whom went to public school, I will note, in their collaboration and what they were able to accomplish to send a message to people here in the country and around the world that We can still do big things when we work together. We can learn from this exploration. They went around the dark side of the moon where people have never been. And so it was really inspiring. They came to the Science Committee yesterday, and I got to shake their hands and thank them. And I think they're bringing a lot of joy and hope to a country that needs it.
And how does that committee work to support future missions into space, and kind of what's next with that?
Well, we have a space subcommittee. I'm not currently on it, but I've served on it in the past. And we do have, we worked on and actually just passed the NASA reauthorization out of the committee. We reauthorized the funding for NASA, but we also need to have the workforce, the educational opportunities and workforce programs to keep those space missions going. So I mentioned that they all went to public school, all the 4 of the astronauts who were on Artemis II. How inspirational that kids can look up and see their dream and understand that they too may be able to be an astronaut and go into space, and also to focus on what we learn from those missions too. It's pretty incredible.
I also want to turn to the midterms for a moment. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says he thinks Democrats can win back the House this upcoming cycle. How do you think things would be different here in the House if Democrats were in control?
Well, I served both in the minority and the majority, and I think they would be different because they would be far less chaotic. And with Democratic leadership, we will focus on the needs of the American people. I don't think we've done much at all in this Congress to really address the needs of the American people. Wherever I go across the district I represent, there's a lot of anxiety about costs, about will young people today be able to buy a home? Will we be able to afford childcare? Will we be able to go to college? I meet with students a lot. They give me hope for the future. Last week at home, I met with 5th graders who happen to know how many members of Congress there are and even how many representatives Oregon have. Abernathy Elementary School in Portland. I met with high school students at Lincoln High School who are on the Constitution team. They give me hope for the future, but we have to have a better future for them. And the way I look at it is when we focus on those affordability issues, and I always think about the late Senator Paul Wellstone, who said we all do better when we all do better. So looking at affordability issues, healthcare issues, and also addressing the corruption that we've seen in this administration, we will be leading in issues that really do improve the lives of Oregonians and Americans. So we can get back. I mean, my hope and my goal is to get back to a place where every generation knows that the next generation will have a better future. We're not there now, and I can tell that when I speak with young people. Will I ever be able to have a better future than the generation before me? And I think back to my immigrant grandparents who were poor. They came over to the United States on a boat. Grandpa worked in a coal mine and then worked for Ford Motor Company, but they knew their children in the United States of America, they would have a better future. And that was true up until now, where there's so much doubt. We have to turn that back around so that the next generation will, in fact, have a better future.
And then lastly, do you see any opportunities to work with the Trump administration?
With the administration, not so much. I do work with Republicans on many issues. This administration has been out of touch with the needs of the American people. I don't know that Donald Trump has ever set foot in a public school or ever struggled to put food on the table or ever struggled to pay for health care. And I think that they certainly seem out of touch to me. This transportation secretary with his many children just went on a road trip encouraging people to go on a road trip. He had corporate sponsors paying for his trip and his gas. The reality is people right now are hesitating to do that. So because of the cost of everything, especially gas. So they're out of touch with the American people. So I don't see a lot of opportunity. I would hope that we would be able to, but I have not found that they have been particularly interested in doing things that really matter to the people I represent.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Really
Of course.
appreciate your time
Come
today.
back anytime.
And that's all for this week's Capitol Conversations. For more news like this, be sure to check out the other videos on this app. In Washington, I'm Maddie Beer Temple.